Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
You want a quality education that will give you a skill set that will make you marketable for the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach from Metro Atlanta.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent, also from Atlanta, currently in North Carolina.
And I'm David Williams, and I'm a dad from Chicago, Illinois.
This week in the news, 2021 college admission predictions, an article by Brennan Bernard of Forbes. Mark and Anika will discuss why is it so important to establish academic accountability. Our bonus content for this week is it easier to get into a selective college from a public or private high school? Our interview is the final part from Julia Esquivel, the former admission officer and current college counselor from Melton Academy, on how to work more effectively with your school counselor. And there will be no college spotlight for this week.
And friends, I had a whole bunch of announcements, but the article just sort of included all the things I was going to say. So I'll hold off on my points and intertwine them in the context of my article discussion with Dave and save them for there. Other than I will say this, that our regular listeners know I'm recovering from rotator cuff surgery, and recovery's been a little harder on me than I thought. It's been draining my energy. I have to sleep out of a chair, so I sleep like 2 hours. And until I fully recover, we're going to be doing spotlights every other week rather than every week. So I think in about 6 to 8 weeks, we'll be able to resume back to weekly coverage of spotlights, probably right around the time when we're done the book chapter. So after we get through 171, we'll be dropping the book chapter section and should be able to resume weekly college spotlights. But for now, we're on every other week, and we'll pick up next week with San Diego State University. For this week, though, it is time for admission tip and admission vernacular. And my admission tip this way comes by way of Jim Bach, VP enrollment at Swarthmore College. He's been there since 1990. And I was on with him this week on a webinar. And he made a really good point. It had to do with wait lists. So according to Bach, wait lists break down into 3 categories. 1/3 of people just do not go online and just do not complete the form. Another immediately go on and indicate that they have some interest in being on the wait list, but they really don't. It's just a kind of a knee-jerk reaction because it's the first one they've heard from. They haven't really thought through things. Their ego's been bruised. And then the 1/3 are really the true waitlist people who legitimately want to be on. And Bach's point is one that is our tip of the day. Don't be that knee-jerk person that just immediately goes on, because they're relying on that as a true indication of who really wants to be on their waitlist. If you're just reacting out of a bruised ego rather than you genuinely want to be on that, it doesn't really help you and it doesn't help the institution. So what he recommends is this. And I recommend it as well. Don't immediately fill the form out and say you want to be on it. Take some time, see where else you get in. And then once you kind of know where else you're in, then survey the land. And if you really want to be on it, then indicate you really want to be on it. Because they're going to take that as their indication of who's serious about being on their wait list. So it doesn't help you or it doesn't really help them just to be on the wait list, just to be on the wait list. Does that make any sense, Dave?
It makes perfect sense, you know. They want you to swipe left or swipe right.
Well, and here's what's in it for you. Their research indicates that people that immediately go on and say yes, oftentimes aren't that serious. So it's almost to your advantage for them to take you more seriously if you wait a couple weeks and say you want to be on it. So it signals a more legitimate interest to them. So that's how it's not just a courtesy to them, but also in your best interest.
And Mark, you and I know that the week of a college admissions is highly emotionally charged.
Sure
and,
is.
It's full of the highest highs and some of the lowest lows that individuals could experience in their lifetime. And the worst time to make a decision is when you are either on an emotional high or a low. So let things settle a bit and let things gel. And time often both heals wounds and makes the future path more clear. So give it time.
Well, not only that, Dave, the timing of this is apropos because this podcast is coming right at a time when a lot of decisions, especially from more competitive schools, are coming out. Like either a few days before this podcast goes live or a few days after. I mean, every day right now, lots of decisions are coming out. And so this is, this isn't one of those, okay, you're hearing it now, apply it in 6 months or apply it in 2 years or even apply it in 3 months. Like, this is something for you seniors, apply immediately.
Yes.
All right, Dave. I never thought I would actually be giving you this as admissions vernacular. I really didn't.
Yeah, okay. That could be a good or bad thing.
Well, it's probably bad for you because it's a tough one. But
okay.
The term is buyers and sellers. Buyers and sellers. What do you think that means?
Well, in the stock market, buyers are the people who
Sorry,
buy
dude.
the stock.
Sorry, dude.
well, hold on.
Podcast.
Well, let me finish my analogy. So in the college market, the buyers would be perceived to be the students, and the sellers are the colleges because they are trying to sell you on their educational products.
Bah, I need a sound for got it wrong. Dude.
Oh, man. It makes so much sense. Well,
Sorry.
That should be the term.
So the reason why this is tough, and I really never thought I'd be sharing this, but I've bragged about Jeffrey Salingo's book, Who Gets Into Why, A Year in a Life of College Admissions, where he spent a year in 3 admission offices, Davidson College, Emory University, and University of Washington. So 3 different schools, like a small liberal arts school, a national university, and a flagship school, right? And I've talked about that book a lot because it's one of the best books to come out in a long time in college admissions. So Jeffrey Salingo uses this term, buyers and sellers, in the book. And the only reason I'm sharing it is because I am noticing this has now crept into admissions vocab. You're hearing it a lot. It's being referenced even by admissions officers, certainly by college counselors. So it's, how things get introduced and they creep their way into the vocab. This is literally a new term introduced the way he'd used it less than a year ago, and it's creeping its way into admissions vocab. So the buyers are schools that have to buy students by giving merit scholarships. They have to incentivize students through tuition discounts to be competitive, which, by the way, is 98% of colleges, and the 2% of schools are sellers. Their brand strength is so strong. People are banging down the door to go to those schools that they can give 100% of their money away on the basis of need and still have admissions rates under 20% and have people coming in droves because of their brand strength in the marketplace. So each school has to use a very different approach in terms of how they recruit students. Never thought I'd throw out admissions vocab that wasn't even in the conversation a year ago. But, when you start seeing stuff creep up over and over and you start hearing it used different ways, then that's the definition of admissions vernacular. It's becoming part of the lingo.
Well, I think that if you're going to be that tough, I at least deserve a small order of fries.
I told you, when you get it right, dynamic scoring, I up the ante. When you get it wrong, I dial it back a little bit. That's how this works.
Oh, man, you cold, man, dude. Just throw me a fry.
You got melt last week. You got melt, so I had to up my game.
Okay.
I won't come that hard next time.
Thank you. I'm starving.
All right. We got a great article. In fact, it's so great, I almost thought of doing a part 1 and part 2, but we got several great articles lined up for the next few weeks. And when you do part 1, part 2, part 3, you get behind on some amazing articles. So won't do that often, but we got a lot to say. Dave, introduce it and let's take it away. Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
Well, great. It's a great article by Brennan Bernard of Forbes. It's called 2021 College Admission Predictions. And it's the type of article that just really lends itself to discussion and making it open-ended. So, Mark, you and I know that there are 4 points to this article. And what I'm going to do is give the heading to the point and throw out a quote or two, and then we'll discuss it. Sounds good?
But let me set the context. So,
okay.
About a year ago, we did another article on predictions for 2020. So I think what's happening is Brennan's going to do this now annually. And what he does is he surveys a whole bunch of deans, directors, VPs of enrollment, and he asks them, what do you see happening based on, you're in the trenches. What do you see as the big trends for 2021? And so he interviewed a bunch of people just to get their predictions on what he saw or what the leaders in the field see as the coming trends in 2021. And then he kind of summarized them into a bunch of categories. I just wanted to kind of create that context, Dave.
All righty. So there are 4 major prediction categories that Brennan talks about. And the first one is enrollment trends. And the first quote I actually have 2 quotes under enrollment trends. The first is by Jerry Lucido, who is the dean of strategic enrollment at USC. And he says, quote, "All but the most highly selective colleges will hedge their bets and open the doors wider." And then I'll have a second quote by Charles Lloyd, the president of White Mountain Community College. And he says, quote, "After seeing a year of unpredictability from all perspectives, the fall of 2021 may prove to be a brighter season for community college enrollment." So based on those 2 quotes, Mark, what insights do you have?
Yeah, and I'm also going to throw a couple other things that they said in there into this section. So as far as hedge their bets and open their doors wider, I'm really glad that we're emphasizing this because there's so much buzz in the media about how the most selective schools are getting so many more applicants. We know that the masses are the opposite. And it's particularly true for students of color, students that apply for financial aid. And this stuff is tracked. You can look at things like how many FAFSA applications are completed. FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. You can see that these numbers are down. You can look at students applying who are requesting financial aid. And something like the Common App, which has incredible data because of the millions of people that use it. And you can see where the applications are down. And for students, this comes up a little bit later again when I'll address it again, because I know that one of the points he makes is about access. So we see that over and over and over again. And we know that colleges lost a lot of money. And we know that they experienced overall less applications from less students, too. Keep in mind, students are applying to more schools. So less students. So what do? You need more money. You got to cast a wider net. So most schools are going to be a little bit more generous when it comes to the point of acceptance. When it comes to the point about community colleges that you made, yeah, this is a big reality. But community colleges got killed. Like, really once again, it shouldn't be surprising because we did talk about how regional publics and community colleges are where you're seeing less applications. And so one of the things it says in this article that I think is noteworthy, when you say, well, why did that happen? So one of the things it says is many students chose not to attend school. And it says they end up assisting children with remote learning, having to work more hours, or make up for other loss of household income. And then one of the things he says in this article is that community colleges, actually, their biggest competitor, their biggest rival is no college. So here's what he said. He said he's quick to add, of course, brighter is relative after the national sector was down 10% year over year in 2020. Lloyd believes many students chose the popular alternative to going to community college this fall, which is our longtime rival, no college. So community college often competes with no college. Many people that go to community colleges forego, forwent, is that a word, forwent? They forego, I want to say foregone college to work. And we talked about this before. We said, hey, when you're food insecure, you're not thinking about college. And so he expects with the rebound of the economy and with, things going the right direction for things to have an uptick when it comes to community college. Anything else you want to say on that, Dave?
Yeah, and that would make perfect sense. And he did mention, too, that many students took gap years. In some schools, it was high as 10, 15%. So a lot of those gap year students are going to be coming back into the fray. And of course, for the more selective colleges, the kids took gap years. And for the community colleges, you mentioned, it was often gap year meant you didn't go to college. And quite frankly, I think a large segment of the student population just weren't comfortable with paying money for this new concept of online education, and that they're looking forward to getting back to face-to-face. But that's the next category, so I won't get too much.
Yeah, before you get back to that, I want to make another point that Lucido from USC made. And keep in mind, what happened was Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation gave a grant to USC, to the USC Center for Enrollment Research Policy and Practice, their CERPP. And it was to study the impact of COVID-19 on student enrollments. So Lucido's looking at a lot of the research there. And one of the things he says is testing is now optional at best, missing in many files. The ability to travel and experience campuses is highly limited. Activities are more difficult to access. Then he says this means the strength of the curriculum completed and the grades achieved, which have always been the most important factors, and he says this is really important, will play an even stronger role.
Yes.
And I just want to underscore that, because when there's less focus on testing and you don't have as much activities and you can't really evaluate who visits the campus and doesn't visit the campus and have some of that engagement, or you're not traveling as much, that has to go somewhere, that other emphasis. And where it's going to go is to curriculum and grades and curriculum and grade trends. So we've talked about that before, but I just want to get that out there. And then that's what I had on this point, Dave.
Yes. And you know, I talked with my daughter about how she felt that it was so much more challenging for kids, because the reality is most students don't want their whole decision point to come down to just their grades, because, you know, most students are at the top of their class, and that extracurriculars, and believe it or not, testing as well, because some students, there is a portion of students whose testing is somewhat better than their grades, do like to have as many other factors to round out the picture. Well, the fact is, this year they're looking at a very narrow picture. So that is being highly disadvantageous to many students who require a much more broader approach. So it's been a tough year for these kids.
I mean, the only thing I would say on that is that most schools have gone test optional, not test blind. And test optional does allow you to have your testing included if you're a strong tester.
That's true. But as we pointed out before, many kids who wanted to get tested couldn't because their test sites weren't available. So it's been tough.
All right, let's go to the next one.
Good. Virtual reality. Mike Drish, the director of first-year admissions of University of Massachusetts at Amherst, said, quote, "There is a comfort now with the virtual engagement, bracket, webinars, social media, virtual tours, for both admission officers and prospective families. And that will allow many colleges to have a broader reach than ever before and greater access for years to come. Everybody has the setup, so it seems likely that a return to in-person recruitment will be accented by virtual engagement."
So I could not agree more at this point. So this week I participated in 2 different webinars with groups of colleges. So one was with 6 schools. It was Swarthmore, Bowdoin, Carleton, Amherst, Williams, and Pomona. And then I was on another one with 5 southern schools, including Trinity in San Antonio, Sewanee in Tennessee, Furman in South Carolina, Rhodes in Memphis, and Rollins in Winter Park, Florida.
Winter Park, yeah. Florida.
Winter
Great
Park.
destination.
Yeah, we did a spotlight on them. Yeah. So those are the 5. And interesting, one of the points that was brought up in the one session, Seth Allen, who's the dean of admission at Pomona, he said, I love doing counselor breakfasts, and I miss doing counselor breakfasts. But he said, you want to know how many people are on this call right now? 753 counselors. He said, I've never done a counselor breakfast with 753 people before. He said, there's no way in the world we're giving this up. So virtual reality and engagement is here to stay. Colleges, quite frankly, have been blown away at the attendance, not to mention the low cost and ease on their part to do it. You're not traveling and having your whole staff set the logistics up of all these breakfasts.
Yeah.
And these meetings that they'll do for counselors. Now, they're still going to want to go back to some of that. Don't say, there's a young yearning. We're social creatures, and there's a yearning for human connection, and especially admissions people. In general, it's a group of extroverts, and even the introverts have learned to turn on the extroversion for that part of the job. But there's no doubt about it that virtual connections are here to stay, and they're only going to get better and better. That's the thing that I would add. With another year to study what, best practices of what their peers and competitors are doing, and with more and more advances in technology, they're only going to get better and better and better. So that's definitely here to stay.
Yeah. As one person said, we love virtual reality, but we're all looking forward to actually taking our pants out of the closet and wearing them from time to time.
No, it's true. And that's the quote from Grant Gosselin, director of undergraduate at Boston College.
Yeah.
He says place-based education will be in high demand. And what does he say? He says, look, high school and college students are exhausted by online learning. They long for personal connections that online learning simply cannot provide. A lot of ways, the residential colleges, they feel like they got a chance for people to see their value because you got to not experience it for a while and you just realize how important it is. So a resurgence and return to residential education is one of the things that he's predicting is one of the big trends for 2021.
That's right. Okay, next point. Testing. Boy, we've talked a lot about testing, and I'm going to say another quote from Mike Drish, the director of admissions of UMass Amherst. And not surprisingly, this is what he says, quote, SAT optional for a few admission cycles means a potential new normal, and risk-adverse institutions may be concerned about returning to requiring test scores and therefore losing any perceived gain in these years. And we've talked about this a lot, Mark.
Yeah, but let me just share some more things that have happened even this week. So first of all, like a guide I recommend every family purchase. It was one of the recommended resources I was most passionate about is the FISC Guide to the Colleges. They announced this week that they are no longer going to be including ACT and SAT information in their guide. Let me tell you why this is powerful. Because one of the reasons why schools have been so concerned about their test scores hasn't necessarily been because they felt like they were predicting academic success at their institution. They're just concerned that that's one of the measuring tools that the public uses on how good they are. And if all the guides are going to have them listed, and if the public thinks the better the testing, the better the school, then they have to be conscious of that, or they ignore that at their own peril. So what FISC does, others are going to copy. And so that becomes a trend. That's another thing to undermine testing. Now, I told you I did 2 webinars this week, 6 schools in one, 5 in the other. All 11 of those colleges were test optional last year. And every one of them has already announced that they're test optional this year. And in that first group, Bowdoin, Williams, Amherst, Swarthmore, Pomona, and Carleton, only school that had been test optional in there before was Bowdoin. So it was new for everybody else in that group. Every one of them, this was a huge part of the conversation on the webinar. Testing, role of testing, and they all indicated that they've been surprised how well they can read a file. They all indicated once you've done something a couple years, it becomes habit, you begin comfortable with it, and chances are quite high that you'll be doing it in the foreseeable future. But I do want to take people behind the scenes on something that I don't think we've talked about on this podcast. So let me ask you a question, Dave. Who do you think deans of admission report to? And it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. There are different answers, but who do you think they report to?
I would say right to the top. So the chancellor, the president, or the chairman of the board of governors, but they report to the big kahuna in that institution that makes all the hiring and firing decisions.
So in some institutions, especially VP of enrollments, will report directly to the president. But it's also very common to see a model where the dean of admission reports to the provost. You know what the provost is, Dave?
I always wondered what that meant. Was it like the vice president?
It's basically your chief academic officer.
Okay.
In other words, a lot of schools, your director of admission has to report to the head of the faculty.
Oh,
now, let me tell you something that's going on behind the scenes at almost every one of these institutions. The admission office is saying test optional is great. We love it. We can read files. We can make great decisions without scores. Now, the admission office is incentivized to do that because the audience for the admission office is the person not in the college yet, right?
Right.
You're focused on prospects. And so you know how prospects think. You know they don't like testing being required. You also know your competitors are going test optional. And that's going to put even more pressure on you if they do it and you don't. You also believe you have the skills within your office to read the file. And a lot of them legitimately have concerns like what we've talked about over and over again, how tests are highly correlated to parent income, parent education, and have a built-in bias and the ability of families to supplement them with, expensive test prep. So they've always been troubled by that. But the big concern they're going to have is that our applicants like that we're test optional and our competitors are doing it. So you're just going to make my job that much harder. Now, on the other side, faculty like test scores.
Right.
They just believe that there's something about test scores that is highly correlated to quality. And if you're getting away from test scores, to a lot of faculty, that means you're lowering your academic standards. So at a lot of institutions over the next few years, behind the scenes, unbeknownst to anything you will ever see, I will ever see, is this war that goes on. And I mean, I have experienced this before when I was in the game, and I know that this is happening and it's going to happen. And so it's like a big arm wrestle. Faculty, we want test scores. Admission office, do you want students? Do you want really good students? And so we'll see how it plays out. My guess is that the test optional is going to end up winning the day because, remember, the admission office is also highly correlated to the budget, and the budget runs your school. And I think the fact that so many other schools are doing it will be enough weight for most of the admission offices to win the day. Like right now, they have a built-in excuse, which is students are unable to take it, so we can't do it. But when that blows over, then you're going to see what becomes ongoing policy. But I do have one other announcement to make, and then, Dave, I'll let you talk. So I don't know if I'm introducing a whole can of worms here, but another trend that I'm watching, and we've brought it up before, the test blind movement is really picking up some momentum. When Worcester Polytech Institute went test optional, I don't know if it was 5 years ago. Don't quote me on that. It feels around that long ago. It was a big deal because you hardly see, it's a very selective school with really high average scores, and you don't usually see, engineering, computer, STEM-based technical schools, which tend to put the most emphasis on scores, go test optional. So that was like a big landmine in the college admissions world when WPI said they were going test optional. Well, this week they said they're going test blind.
Wow.
And so I just see an incredible momentum right now for the test optional and the test blind movement. And I think what people don't understand is if you're taking away test scores, that means you're putting more weight on rigor and grades, right? Well, the student that can go into AP Physics or BC Calc and do well, that's a student that normally was going to test well anyway.
Yes.
And that's why the schools really don't feel like they need test scores. They can just say, okay, let's see your advanced classes, who took them and who did well in that. And it's a total proxy for test scores.
Absolutely.
And to the extent that it isn't, that kid that is so super motivated, that works that hard, that kid will be okay anyway. They might just outwork somebody, like, not to get too personal, Dave, but we know your sister, Ann. Yeah. We know how hard she worked, and she, academics didn't come as easy to her as to you, Andrew, or Michael, I would argue, but she outworked everybody and ended up being a doctor.
That's correct.
And, it was hard for her to do extremely well in the MCATs. You and I know she worked her tail off. But there's that person, but that person is still okay. They just outwork everybody with their discipline and drive.
Correct.
I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how I see it.
Yes.
Before we move on, Dave, I do want to say there's a quote in here from Bob Schaefer. We've talked about Bob Schaefer a lot. As we know, Executive Director at Fair Test, National Center fair and open testing and the strongest advocate of test optional, test blind. Schaefer's got the stats in this article. And what he says is 72% of all bachelor's degree granting institutions now are not requiring testing for the fall of 2021. And he says more than 600 new colleges and universities added test optional admissions since March of 2020. And more than 100 of those 600 have said their new policies are not just for the pandemic, but they are either permanent or they are multi-year pilots. And so he says, we can be certain that at least 1,170 schools, more than half of all four-year schools, will be test optional for the fall of 2022. And he predicts that that number is likely to be much, much higher. Any final thoughts on testing, Dave?
No, I think it's something that we've always expected. And, once again, in a situation where the demand curve for colleges is falling, it's in the college's best interest to remove unnecessary barriers to getting in acceptable students who would be successful. And clearly, test optional is one of those ways of doing it.
And that's a good segue to our fourth point, which is about access.
Access. And this, the quote I chose, is a gentleman that you have had on for, I believe, a multi-part interview series. Gil Villanueva, the Associate VP and Dean of Admissions of Richmond. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Gil, Mark? When did you have him on?
For those who never heard the interview, Gil's a great guy. He's served in multiple different schools in leadership roles and admission. But he's an interesting guy. He grew up in a family, I want to say 12 or 13, and had a one bathroom. So, he came over from the Philippines, and he said, he jokes in my interview with him about how poor he was. And so he's now the, Dean of Admission at Richmond. He has a real passion for access. In fact, before I interview a lot of people, I asked them, what do they want to talk about? What do you have passion on? And he said, I'd like to talk about things like imposter syndrome and what it's like being dirt poor on these campuses and resources that are there. So that's what my whole interview with him is, how the the under-resourced kid can make it to the finish line, because he said, I was that kid. So he speaks out on this topic because, that's a little bit about who he was. Go ahead, Dave, take it away.
Absolutely. So I was going to say it makes sense that his point, and I'm going to quote him, is that in all of these discussions, quote, low-income student applications and enrollment will continue to lag, and be ready for more financial aid applications because 2020 was, in his words, quote, no bueno. Which, because my daughter is taking Spanish with your daughter, I know that means no good.
Good for you. Good for you.
I'm learning.
You are learning. Because you're next for your lessons, my friend.
Absolutely.
Dave pays my daughter in advance for his own Spanish lessons, and then he goes AWOL and says, I'm too busy.
Oh, well, I'm afraid that she's going to do some optional testing on me and find out, you don't qualify. You're in remedial Spanish. I'll have to get you another tutor.
Yeah, the interesting thing about this conversation about access is it's quite complicated because there's going to be, and the article talks about this, there's going to be a real demand to redress the fact that under-resourced kids have been really hurt by the pandemic. So there's going to be a real pressure to do a lot of things in terms of your outreach, in terms of your admissions, in terms of your recruitment. And then there's also a lot of government initiatives in place. There's a lot of growth for the double the Pell Grant movement and all those things. We'll see whether or not they get enacted, but they put pressure on institutions to do more when it comes to access so that you don't have just your school populated just with kids from well-resourced families, because that's not the real world. And that's really not part of most schools' mission your mission is to educate everybody, but part of your mission is also some societal change, usually is involved in most schools' missions. So there's going to be a lot of pressure around there. And the article talks about that. And some people in this article that are quoted are a lot more optimistic than others about how many of the inroads that colleges will make. One thing we didn't share when we quoted from Lucido from USC is he believes the pandemic is going to put more pressure on colleges to covet families who can pay because of the financial. Because we never brought that up, but we'll bring it up now because it's obviously the opposite point, right?
Yeah.
In one sense, you're trying to reach out to kids who are really hurt by the pandemic, under-resourced kids, urban kids, a lot of students of color. But on the other hand, you need money to run your school, and so there's a conflict, there's tension there. And I think for a lot of schools, they're going to wish they had the resources to do more, but they're just going to feel like we just can't. Their heart's going to be in the right place, but their budget and their pocketbook is going to say we're not going to be able to do what we'd like to do. And I'm more in the camp of what Lucido says, and that there'll be more of an emphasis on families that can pay than there really will be more. There'll be a lot of talk around access and outreach, but not a lot of dollars directed there.
They cannot continue to raise tuition at double-digit rates like they have in the last 20 years to cover. So they're in a real bind. So, yeah, for most colleges, the heart will be there, but the money may not be to address what's really going to be a crisis, I believe, in low-income and minority student access to college education.
Yeah, and the article closes with just a bunch of pronouncements from a bunch of different people about things that they think will happen. Were there any of those that you wanted to comment, Dave, or not really?
No, the summary is that the bottom line is that the outlook is still cloudy. No one really knows when we're going to get over this COVID pandemic, or if we are fully going to ever get over it because of all the issues with vaccinations and variants and so forth. And so that all these predictions come with caveats in that nothing is written.
Yeah, but I'll say this. Now, mind you, Brennan actually had this article come out in January. We're picking up 2 months later. Speaking from the perspective of 11 VP of enrollments and deans that I was on with this week, everybody is really, really optimistic about the fall being open, being in person. They all said, not only for us, but we don't know of any school that's not planning on being open and planning on being in person. And the news of the fact that vaccines are going to be available to everybody by May. Everybody is either moving toward doing in-person tours now, or they have plans to do them over the summer. And so there's a real optimism about a return to normalcy. I don't think we're fully going to get there in the fall of 2021. And like you said, we're always subject to some new variant coming and sabotaging things. But there is a lot of optimism amongst admission leaders that things are really going to get back to normal when it comes to people can come and visit, students can live on dorm. I don't know if it means there will still be mask requirements or not, or they'll practice some aspects of social distancing, but people can see the end in sight, and there's some optimism about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Dave, there's a few things I didn't see in this article that I would have thought someone would say. One is a continued increased emphasis on demonstrated interest.
Yes.
Another is something you and I talked about a few weeks ago in the news, which is schools getting more and more creative at coming up with special programs that can generate revenue and can appeal to the needs of the public, whether it's broadening their certificate programs or increasing hybrid educational opportunities so their reach isn't just limited to people in their immediate locale. Those are a couple of things I'm also looking to see if I was coming up in this year as well that I didn't see quoted here.
Yes, and we've done podcasts on both those issues in the last few months, and I think that those are good points.
Yeah, but this is a great article, and I'm going to tell Brendan, for those of you who regular listeners of the podcast know this, for you new you don't know this, but Brendan and I were colleagues together from 2001 to 2004. We both worked together in the Westtown office. He was like the associate director of college counseling. I was more in an adjunct role at that time, focusing more on traveling all around in the admissions side. And I didn't have the caseload he had, but I was still involved in the college counseling process. And we were colleagues together. And we've also had him on the podcast 2 different times. He writes for all kinds of people. He writes very well. But to me, this is my favorite article that he does every year. Although I will say this, next week's article is a Brennan article as well, and it's a really good one.
Right.
That we have back-to-back Brennan articles. He's also reached out to a lot of admissions people to look at how they're changing their recruitment, and we'll be talking about that next week. So we got back-to-back articles, but I love this, and I'm going to let him know, like, Brennan, you got to do this every year because, like, hearing what everybody says about the changes, to me, that's really interesting.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a good wrap.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
I learned something, friends, about Anika. She likes her hot coffee, scorching hot. And she's a Star Wars addict. I threw addict in there.
Die Hard, yes.
Our new recording system, you can see each other. Our old one, you couldn't. So she's got this crazy-looking freaky mug, and it's a Star Wars.
Stormtrooper. Thank you.
Stormtrooper coffee mug. You and Dave, sci-fi people.
Yay, go Dave.
Quick question for you. Have you ever had physical therapy?
No, I don't think so.
All right. I started in 2 days.
Oh, that's right. Oh, my God.
And I just wanted some tips because I've never done it before.
Go. That's your tip. Go.
Yeah. Go listen to what they say. Do it, right?
Yep.
That's probably all I need to know. All right. Back to our countdown. We are looking at where Fortune 500 CEOs got their undergraduate degree. And in 10th spot, we have 8 schools that are all tied with 5 CEOs. This is based on a very credible 2018 study. And we have Yale in New Haven. We have Illinois in Champaign, Bucknell in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, Texas in Austin, Princeton in Princeton, Lehigh in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and SUNY Binghamton. Do you know that school? No, I got you.
Never heard of that one.
So SUNY Binghamton is the flagship school for New York State.
Oh, wow.
So there's actually, I believe I'm correct on this, 64 SUNYs. SUNY is an acronym that stands for State University System of New York, SUNY, S-U-N-Y. But Binghamton is the flagship of all of them.
Okay.
So they're all over the state. So here you learned something.
Mm-hmm.
Good for SUNY Binghamton. Congrats. One more, tied for 10th. And then we move into the next ones that are all in 6th place. So we'll take that next week. All right, Anika, we're diving into chapter 165. As I mentioned last week, this section of the book looks at, once you're in college, how to excel. So, one of the things I've always tried to do in the podcast is have a lot of new content. So even if the most experienced listener is listening, they're going to learn something. You may not get that in this section. These may be some reminders of things you already know. May not be as profound, but in my opinion, these are the keys for excelling once you're already in college. So this chapter is called, Why is it so important to establish academic accountability? Anika, you've read this section. What were your takeaways?
I did read it, and it sounded like to me you tied it into the importance of, well, first of all, you need to make sure you're doing well, right? But the big reason that I took away from the chapter was because you want to graduate, hopefully within 4 years. Like if you establish some type of work ethic, if you have accountability partners, and was most interesting in here was that about the schools that actually have systems in place.
Right.
Because you think about college, you think that, oh, no, you're on your own now. And if you don't do it, you just don't do it and people don't care. But that's not necessarily the case for everybody. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, so I start the chapter by just talking about how accountability works in general. So I thought there's a reason why things like Weight Watchers and Jenny Craig and all these things work, because we all need it. This is not just a teenage thing. This is something for adults. Without accountability, we tend to go astray. Another example I use is I say, have you ever noticed when you're on the freeway and all of a sudden all the traffic slows down? Look to the side of the road. There's the popo. That's slang for cop, by the way. There's the cop. And what's it do? It produces accountability. And then I say the same thing happens when it comes to schools. I use a couple examples from when I was in boarding school. We had these acronyms. One was called SNID, which was a Saturday night in-house detention, when all the other students are at restaurants, movies, sporting events. Those who didn't handle their business are stuck in a room with a teacher doing schoolwork when everybody else is out on the town. And then if SNID wasn't good, we had SMOD, which was Sunday morning only detention. All these acronyms.
Right.
Why? Because accountability works. It can change behavior. And then I took it to the college level and started giving examples on the college level. I gave an example of how Karis at Davidson, you can't skip a class at Davidson. It's so small, your teachers would call you out.
Right.
And then I looked at a research study that was done. Stanford looked at one school that was in an area of very low performing schools in Oakland, California. But one school that stood out was the Life Academy of Health and Biosciences in Oakland. And this school has an incredibly low dropout rate. And it's surrounded by other schools with high dropout rates, low graduation rates. And here's this one school, the Life Academy of Health and Bioscience School. And so they wanted to look and say, why is it that this school has such a low dropout rate, such a high graduation rate? They also have a very high graduation rate all the way through college, and they're graduating in 4 years. And there's actually a study done on the school in the article Mind Shift. It was published in 2015, and they found out that the key thing was that they had established a peer accountability program. I give another example in the book. I was talking to a large college in Georgia. I wasn't talking to the college. I was talking to some admission people at the college. I'm going to make Anika choke on her hot coffee, and then we're in trouble. And this representative was saying, the reason why our graduation rate is not as high as Kennesaw State, which is another large public school that Anika and I and others know in Georgia, it says because Kennesaw has set up and implemented some very creative programs to hold their freshmen accountable to getting off to a good start. Georgia State has won all kinds of awards because they have a pretty large population of under-resourced students, but they have a much, much higher graduation rate than other schools that have similar demographics, and they have a much higher graduation rate than they had 10 years ago before they started implementing structural forms that hold students accountable. And we could go on and on and on and on. I use an example of how Karis took this really, really hard math and science course in her last semester in college, and she knew her best friend Chelsea was really good at math and science and very disciplined. So what did they do? They studied together. And Chelsea would say, let's get together and review everything, Karis. And that helps, and that works. And then I also give an example in the story of Dave. Did you know that was Dave in that story?
I did. I was like, look at Dave coming all from the past.
Yeah. So I talked about Dave here, and I'll read this really briefly. I said, I was talking to Dave about his Princeton experience, and he said, what helped at Princeton is a bunch of students would get together and we would all study the difficult material in groups. And I said, they understood accountability. So what are your takeaways, Anika?
I'm always thinking about the kids that don't have the networks and the resources and all that stuff. So I'm thinking about the kid who is not used to that level of accountability that's going into college, and there isn't a program in place from the school, I guess. Or maybe it is, but maybe it's not that robust. I don't know. So what's the role of the parent to encourage, and maybe the parent doesn't even know. I don't know. Because you don't think about those kind of things. If that's not what your thing is, if that's not what you've been, that's not your background coming from something like that.
Well, I think you're asking the right question, because it's going to be easiest for this accountability to work if there are built-in structures,
right? Where
in effect they'll come to you and make it very difficult for you not to have the accountability, because you'd be like swimming upstream, and fighting against the currents if you're at a place that already has it naturally built in. So we really don't need to spend as much time on, the schools and the structures that are in place. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why certain schools have really, really high graduation rates. Like, sure, part of it is the type of students they attract, not only their motivation and their discipline, the families that they come from, the resources that they have, but some of it is the school's resources that they have and how they use those resources to create systems, that make it hard to fall through the cracks.
Right.
One of the reasons why the University of Virginia for 19 years in a row, Nitra, has had the highest black student graduation rate, higher than 5 of the 8 Ivies, is because of the accountability structure that they have created for their underrepresented students of color, that they've built into their system. giving them such a high. I mean, that's impressive that one school is about to have their 20th year in a row with the highest graduation rate.
Wow.
You know, and that's not accidental. Like, sure, they attract a very strong student, but so do a lot of other schools. So does UCLA. So does, Cal Berkeley. So does Michigan. So does North Carolina. Now, these are some of the most selective public schools in the country. And Virginia's graduation rate for Black students is substantially higher than these other schools because of some systems they put in place. But anyway, you asked a question. I just went off on my little soapbox over here.
No, it's fine.
But let's get back to your question. What do you do if you don't have that? If you don't have a UVA, with like 30 years of these programs they've put in place to help you? And this is why I'm always about being a self-advocate. I'm always about that. And that's why you have to learn the skills of self-advocacy. I'll tell you what most schools, really all schools, have. In fact, I'm in conversations with several of them now about coming on the podcast, actually, and doing an interview. Colleges have academic success centers.
Mm-hmm.
They may not call it that. They may have all kinds of different names, but I don't know of a college that doesn't have a place where there's tutoring, if it's peer tutoring or tutoring, if there's help with writing, other help, language. I mean, lots of things. Organization, they're all different. They're not all the same. But schools have academic success centers. They put on workshops and seminars on things like speed reading and time management and all kinds of different things. And so the biggest thing I feel a takeaway here is teaching students how to become self-advocates so that they learn the resources that the college has to offer and then they tap into them. Because the colleges are going to have resources. The question is going to be whether you're on your own, and if you don't utilize them, you don't get them.
All right.
Versus whether whether they'll come to you or you need to go to them, they're there. So to me, I can't think of a better takeaway than teaching people the importance of finding out what support resources are at your college to assist in helping you graduate. And I'll go further than that. Graduate, I'll say in 4 years, unless it's a program. There are some programs that are 5-year programs. I have to say that. So some people, unless you're in a program that's like a 5-year program, because, you and I did that thing about how much money you save and all the time you save a couple of weeks ago.
All right.
To me, that's the single biggest takeaway. Students need to know how to become self-advocates. And then I'd also say know what those resources are. It's a little bit easier. And that's a place where a parent can come in. A parent can help do the research, find out what the support resources are at your school, and let the student know about them. Because, this is a partnership. But yeah, the student is in the driver's seat and the parents in the passenger seat. But there is still a role for parents in this process. And that could be a really good place for parents. Is you can take it upon yourself to find out what supports are in the Academic Success Center, and how does it work? How do you schedule them? Are they free? Are they, modest fee, all that kind of thing. What are your thoughts?
I think that's it. I agree. It's more of a partnership because, even like in high school, we think, we're always talking about how the parents kind of stop being engaged and all that crap. But it's still important. Still important at the college level, right?
I'm just laughing. You said all that crap because I know how strongly you feel about that. Miss former PTSA president.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's hop into our question today, which is bonus content every 5 weeks.
But wait, before you do that, tell Anitra I said hi because you just called me Anitra a little while ago.
Did I really? I didn't even know it.
I know.
Oh, my goodness. That's when you're really bad. I have a tendency to be really, really absent-minded. So no, I have to tell you this. I have to tell you this.
You could have just been talking to Anitra. I mean,
I could have played it off. So I'm going to bust in myself. So I did this thing yesterday. This is terrible. I'm so embarrassed to say it, but I'm going to say it. So we're getting like a built-in sprinkler system put in our home because I'm tired of going out and lawning the grass, and I want grass I'm like kind of a grass snob. I like my grass to be like perfect. I do. I have like a weed person that does my weeds. I have a landscape person that cuts, and now I'm getting a sprinkler system installed. And so we've been having all these people come and do proposals in this. So I was talking on the phone with this one lady who's coming, and I was just convinced she was Asian. You kind of think the accent and stuff. And so she comes to the door to do a presentation, and I say to her, I am so sorry about what happened this week and the racism directed to the Asian community, and I just want to send my condolences. And like Joy was back from UGA, And Joy was like, you can't tell that person's Latino? She's, what are you, blind? And she said, I was so embarrassed, I ran upstairs.
Oh, come on, Mark.
I said, I thought the guy was Latino, but I thought she was Asian.
Did she say anything? That's most important.
No, she spoke in Spanish is what she did.
Oh, God.
So I'm a little out of it, and you just that's the way it is. So I'm not surprised they called you Anitra. It's kind of known in the family. It's like they just shake their head at me.
We'll give you a pass.
Thank you. Nobody else does. I'll take it. There'll be stuff. Somebody will move, or a new picture will be on the wall, and I won't even see it. They'll be like, or they'll move something. They move something from the corner of the living room, and then they were talking about how it was different. And I was like, what's different? What do you mean? What's different? We changed the whole corner of the living room around. You didn't even notice it. So I have issues. I admit.
You'll get it together.
All right. Let's move off of this topic. Anika and I are so grateful for everyone who has financially supported our podcast. It allows us to pay our staff and cover our other auxiliary expenses involved in having a weekly professional podcast.
At the start of every month, we're going to start sending a special gift to anyone who financially supports your college-bound kid.
I will be sending our donors this bonus content once a month directly to your email. The bonus content will be between 10 to 15 minutes in length. Usually it will be a college-related topic that I'm passionate about. Occasionally, it'll be another bonus hot topic in the news segment. Sometimes it'll be an answer to a question that one of our listeners submits to us via email.
And you'll receive these monthly audio blogs for a gift of any amount. We know that $5,000 to one person is $5 to someone else, and we don't want your budget to be a hindrance to you receiving this additional bonus content. So if you want to support our show, just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. And if you've already financially supported our podcast, you will automatically start receiving this bonus content via your email.
This bonus content is our way of letting our financial supporters know in a tangible way how much we appreciate you. And if you have any questions at all about our monthly bonus content, just send your questions our way. That's to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Once again, questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com.
All right. It is bonus content week, and we're talking about if it's easier. The question is it easier to get into a selective college from a public or a private high school?
Yeah, and I have to admit, I teased this out, made it sound like I'm going to give you an answer, dropped a little tantalizing, which is better, and now I'm going to bail out once we're here. I'm going to say, I'm not trying to be evasive. I'm a straight shooter, but honestly, I have to go back to the classic college admissions answer on this, which is it depends. It depends. But I'm going to give you some more substance than that. I'm not just going to say it's dependent. Okay, Anika, see you next week. So I'm going to fill in a little things. So first of all, I want to say is the biggest distinction is it a college prep environment or a non-college prep environment? Many public schools are actually more college prep than a lot of privates. So really the biggest conversation is not private versus public. It's really, is it college prep versus non-college prep? But in general, private colleges fall into a few categories. If I had to put them into three categories, these would be my categories. Religiously based private schools, which may or may not be college prep, but there's like a religious affiliation.
Wait, you said colleges, but you're talking about high schools right now.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Yeah, I meant to say high schools because we're talking about preparation for college.
Right.
So thanks for catching me on that. So high schools fall into, three primary types of private schools. Religiously based, which may or may not be college prep or not. College prep based, where college prep is the focus, and then I'll call it special needs. That could be anything from a school that specializes in special needs to other type of special affinity schools, even schools like, IMG's like a athletic powerhouse in Florida that's like athletically focused. So I'd call that special needs, type school. But normally people think special needs, it's learning differences. Those are your three main types. So for the purpose of this discussion, though, let's focus on the college prep private school, which is what I worked at for 9 years and what I think was in mind when this topic first came up. This is actually a bonus content section, but it is something that a listener did send in as well. So it really could have been a question from a listener, to tell you the truth, but I wanted to talk about it, so I put it in bonus content. So what are some of the unique distinctives of the college prep-based private school? I wrote down, about a half a dozen of them. One, they have selective admissions just to get into that high school, okay? Obviously, public schools have to take everybody. I mean, unless it's a magnet school, we're not talking about sort of, that falls a little bit outside the purview of this conversation. So selective admissions process. 2, parents and students are drawn there primarily, or at least partially, because they believe that they're going to have better college options. 3, usually smaller classes and usually a smaller school size. 4, academic rigor. 5, usually well-educated, well-resourced parents. So that's what we're going to focus on. That's the kind of school that both your kids went to, the boarding schools, and Nika got it right that time.
Thank you.
I should be able to get it right. You're like my fourth Anika. I think I would know that name by now. But anyway, it's just me being me. What I want to do is I want to talk about the pros and cons of each from a college admission standpoint. So I'm going to start with the pros of the private school. And they're quite a long list here. By the time I'm done, you're going to probably think it sounds like the private school just blows the public away. That's not necessarily true, but let's go over the pros of the private high school. 1, colleges visit more. They visit more because they know there's a college prep going culture there, and they're you want to fish where fish are. And so it's like trying to catch bass. You want to catch bass, go where they're bass. So they know that you've got a high percentage of college-going students, so it gets prioritized when it comes to visits. They also know that there's a higher likelihood that you'll find parents who are able to pay, and they know they need tuition revenue, so it gets prioritized on the visits, and then that produces familiarity with the high school. That gives the students access to the admission officer. And so there's a knowledge of the school and access to the admission officers. That's a pretty big advantage that you tend to have with your private schools. Secondly, they're small classes, small school size. This means they really know the kids well. This means that when they write detailed write-ups and recommendations, it comes through clearly that they know the kids, and then that builds trust because the colleges know what they're getting because they feel like these teachers and the school counselor really know the kids and they can paint a picture of the kids. And admissions is about risk and reward, and I can assess my risk and reward here because they're writing such detailed write-ups of kids that they know because their environment is small. And also because it's a college prep culture, there's a big emphasis on writing these recommendation letters. Like teachers know it's a high priority for you to write really good recommendation letters. There's a lot of training that goes into writing the recommendation letters, both teacher recommendation letters and counselor recommendation letters. So that piece tends to be very, very strong. There tends to be a lot of academic rigor, and that rigor is highly respected by the colleges because their view is that we're going to be harder than you are. We're college or high school. So they love to see that rigor, and that rigor gives them an ability to assess how a student can do in that rigor. So they trust the curriculum. They like the curriculum. All these things are things that build trust. I'm going to stop for a sec because I'm tired of hearing my voice. Any thoughts, comments, anything you want to say so far, Anika?
No.
Just keep it moving?
Keep it moving, yeah.
The other thing, and this is something that should be evident now, we're in today's part 6. Well, you'll hear part 6 in a second. Final part of the Julia Esquivel interview. You can see the difference between a college counselor and a school counselor. First of all, the caseload is about 1/10 the size. Julia works with 40 students. The national average, goes between the mid 400s to the high 400s of students on each counselor's caseload. But that's a school counselor versus a college counselor. Someone like Julia, and not just Julia, but this is what these schools have. The higher professionals that have been on the other side of the desk, worked in college admissions, usually in highly selective college admissions, and know how all of this stuff works because they've been on the other side. So they bring all of that experience of knowing how decisions are made, and they also bring a Rolodex of contacts with them. I'll give you a quick story. Eric Furta, who has been the dean of admission at Penn for close to 15 years, recently left Penn, UPenn I'm talking about, and he went to Penn Charter. What is Penn Charter? Penn Charter is a Quaker boarding school in Philadelphia that's college prep that sends lots and lots of kids to the most selective schools. This is how the whole system works. You hire people like that because okay, we're hiring Eric Furta as our director of college counseling. Don't you think he'll be able to tell all of our kids the ins and the outs about what it takes to get into Penn? And don't you think he has connections over there? He knows everybody in the admission office. So they have people that come in with a Rolodex of contacts, small caseload, and they understand the college process really well. Another thing is some private schools have niche sports that can help students to develop unique hooks. So, for example, when I was at the Westtown School, we had a student leave because we did not offer crew. And this student wanted crew. So we went to another school called Malvern Prep, not far from us, that has pretty strong crew. And this was a student that wasn't necessarily a really top student at our school. He was under average, actually. Guess what? He ended up at Cornell because of crew. So, these schools have those things, there's a school in the greater Philadelphia area known as Episcopal Academy, and they're known for producing lots of kids that get into these schools because of these niche sports that they have, and so you'll find that schools have some of these very, very niche sports that some of these schools have, these selective colleges have, that a lot of high schools don't have, whether we're talking about fencing or water polo or horseback riding, and the list kind of goes on and on and on. So I know these pros are awfully impressive positives, and I'm sure people are thinking, what could possibly be a negative? Anika, any idea of what some negatives are for the private school from a college admission standpoint?
Well, I was waiting for you to say something about the academics, because I get about the techniques and the strategies and stuff, but you think that you're going to a private school because you're getting a certain level of quality of rigor, I guess.
Yeah, but didn't you hear me? I mentioned, I don't know if you were drinking that coffee or thinking about Star Wars over there, or daydreaming. I said academic rigor. That was one of my points.
Yeah, but it just sounded like it was so focused on the strategy piece of it. I don't know. Okay.
I'm saying that they know the curriculum. So colleges know that these schools have rigor. And so they can trust the transcript because they know the student has been exposed to the rigor. And I mentioned that as one of my points. But
well, okay, so maybe I'm thinking that not every private school has rigor. Is that ever the case?
Of course, because as I mentioned, they're public schools that are more college prep really than private schools.
Okay.
Not every. I'm focusing right now on a subset of private schools that are college prep, that have selective admissions to get in, that people choose largely because they think it'll give them more college options. That is not all the private schools that are out there. So that's really the group I'm choosing to use for the sake of this, understanding full well that they're mission-based private schools that are related to church and church affiliation or religious affiliation, special needs private schools, and they're not that many, but there are some private schools that are just for good old average kids that want a lot of personal attention, that take a range of students. They're not that many that are out there like that. There need to be more like that. But those schools have a hard time convincing parents to pay tuition dollars. Because usually when parents want to pay, they want to see, I like the options that I'm seeing come out of here. And it's hard to sell the options if you're not that selective. So most of them try to become somewhat selective so that they can look at the colleges our kids go to. So what would you think would be the negatives of the private school?
I don't know.
So there's a couple big ones. One is that there's a lot of focus on diversity these days, and diversity is not just race and gender and socioeconomics and geography and culture, religion and all of that. A lot of it is class and public versus private. And there's a lot of pushback on these schools that have traditionally taken such a high percentage of their kids from these private feeders that they're not being diverse. And there's a lot of pressure on them to increasingly take a higher percentage of kids from where most schools go, to public schools. And so, in a lot of them, it's not just pressure. A lot of them have also realized, yeah, you're right. We do take an inordinate percentage of kids from these private environments that tend to be wealthier and well-resourced. And we are oftentimes neglecting large swaths of the population. So there's been a huge focus in the last 3 or 4 years on rural schools and how they've been neglected and haven't been, nobody travels there because either they don't think there's a college going population, or they have to drive 45 minutes to get to one school, and they can be in a more of a metro area where they can hit 5, 6, 7 schools in one day. And they're like, why would we go way out into the boonies where, maybe we can do 1 or 2 and it's not that much of a college going population. So there's been a huge focus on that. And schools are just under a lot more accountability to not fish where most of the people are coming from privileged backgrounds. So that's seen as that's now being included as part of their diversity initiatives, is prioritizing people that come from environments that are not as well resourced and where they're not sending that many kids. So that's a big deal, actually, because anytime something's prioritized, if you're in that priority, you have an opportunity to take advantage of the fact that you're being prioritized. And schools want to break in. They know there's talent there. And if they can break in and get some kids and they can get their name up there, they can get access to all that other talent where they know in these other schools, their name's already out there and they're already getting lots of applications. Now, mind you, I have to be careful I talk about public schools. The same way I said there's privileged private and there's non-privileged private. There's college prep private and then there's other types of private. There's also very privileged public schools that are in affluent areas that send lots and lots of kids to these schools, right? And so there is a difference between the under-resourced public school and the highly connected public school. Those are not the same. But there are lots of public schools where colleges are not getting a lot of kids and they'd like to get more, and they'll make it a priority if they can break in and they want access to that talent that's there.
Okay.
But I would say the biggest negative about the private school, and this is a pretty huge one, is, a lot of the selective private schools have such high-end kids when it comes to gifted and talented kids because they're only skimming the cream off the top, that if you go in there and you're just middle of the road, you're not necessarily going to like your college options because the colleges have egos and their mindset is we're harder than you. We're more rigorous. And a lot of the more selective private schools, they not only do not like B's, they don't like B pluses. And so if you're at a school that's got a fairly traditional grade distribution, let's say maybe you give 30 to 40% A's and another, 30 to 40% B's and 30% C's and maybe 10% D's and F's. Well, I'll give you examples, several examples. I mean, I had a student this year, number 1 in her class in middle school, on pace to be valedictorian right now. She's in the 9th grade. That's just through 1 grade, but she was top kid in her class in middle school. She's top kid in the 9th grade. She didn't get into 3 boarding schools. Now she got into, one that's, killer to get in, but she did get into 3 boarding schools. So here are schools that are literally turning down the top kid. I mean, we're talking about a kid, Anika, getting 1,500 on the SAT in the 9th grade and top of her class, good recommendations, lots of extracurriculars, and not getting in 3 schools. So the point is these schools are so selective that for you to get in there, it is not easy to get in there and to be toward the top of the class. I'll give you another example. A student I'm working with that was valedictorian in her middle school. I worked with her on our boarding placement. And I'm also working with her now on our college placement. And she was really sad to find out that her top 7 schools that she's interested in for college, I let her know, I'm going to give you my honest professional opinion. I think you're unlikely to be admitted. She has more B's than A's. Okay. And for those schools, these are not schools that accept kids with more B's than A's. Now, there are a lot of public schools where she could have gone to and been the valedictorian or been top 2% of her class, but she chose to put herself in this super competitive pool. And now she's not getting all those A's and she's not going to have some of the college options that she would have had. So that is by far the biggest challenge from the public versus private, just from the college admission standpoint. Now, I know I've been talking too long now, so what are your thoughts?
Well, that confused me a little bit because even if she was making B's and A's, let's just say she went to the public, right? And she was making the B pluses. She still wouldn't have had those options still because of the type of college. It was just that selective. So it wouldn't have mattered if she went to the private school or the public school, right?
No, what I'm saying is one thing that's hurting her is her B's, okay? But I can tell you from working with her, she would have A's probably a 4.0 at a lot of public schools.
Oh, I see.
She was the valedictorian in middle school, not a single B for 4 years on her transcript, 5th, 6th, 7th, or 8th.
Okay.
So she would have had A's at a public school.
Okay.
And so that can be a killer. And I see this over and over and over and over again. Now, it's not everywhere. It has a lot to do with how much grade inflation the private schools have. There's some private schools grade hard and some don't grade hard. But if you go to one of these private schools that grades hard, and if you're not up toward the top of your class, you know, a lot of times people think, well, I put all this money to go here and, you know, and you're telling me like school A, B, C, and D are like unlikelies for me. And they're very disenchanted by that. So it's just that you put yourself, it's kind of like the difference between this. I'm going to use a basketball illustration because it's March Madness time and I have to do that even though Anika's not a basketball person. These Javon and your kids are, your boys are, you know.
Yes. Okay.
So, you know, if you just go play it, pick up you know, around the corner, you can be a star. It's easy to shine, but you want to go put yourself in the NBA, it's a lot harder to stand out when you jump up into the big leagues. And I'm telling you, these schools and some of these schools, I don't agree with them. I think their egos are too big in some cases. Some of these schools will ding you for B pluses at really hard schools that would be A pluses at a lot of other schools. And when you have conversations with them, you know, and I've had many a conversation with them. I've shared this, I think, on the podcast. I did share this when we had the University of New Hampshire, and I did the spotlight on them. And they said they recalculate your grade point average. And I said, well, what about if it's a kid from Phillips Exeter, which is as hard a boarding school as you'll find in the country? And I mentioned them because they're in New Hampshire as well. And they said, yeah, they might grade harder over there. They might have stronger students, but they also have more resources. So in our mind, it's a wash. And a lot of schools feel that way. Back in 2004 with Cliff Thornton, we've had on this podcast. He came, I brought him in as 2005. Sorry, I brought him in as a keynote speaker at a college fair I used to run. And somebody stood up and they said, you know, like, I'm at Germantown Friends, which is a really hard school, like one of the, you know, most academically rigorous schools in really in the country and certainly in Greater Philadelphia. And they said, are you going to take into consideration that it's a lot harder to get an A here than if my kid would have gone to public school? And he said, to whom much is given, much is required. This is a common thing. I was with 6 deans at Westminster, which is, you know, arguably, what's the most prestigious school in Atlanta, private school in Atlanta. And they have a lot of strong kids. A lot of years they'll have 40 to 45% of their kids are national merit, which is hard. I mean, to have over 40% of your kids national merit. And I was at an event there, and a parent stood up and said the exact same thing. This is 2019 that the parent asked in 2005 at the other event. Are you going to take into consideration it's a lot harder, you know? And Gregory Roberts, you know, Dean of Admission at University of Virginia, who I've interviewed on this podcast, he said, I'm going to answer the question, but you're not going to like my answer. He said, we'll look at the fact that your school's harder, but we won't put as much weight on it as you think we're going to put. So that's the difficulty with the public school. Now, one of the things about that's the difficulty with the private school. Now, one of the thing about the public school is that most of the advantages of the private school, if you actually know what you're doing, you can negate almost all of them. Now, you can't get around the fact that if they have a bad curriculum, they lack rigor. You can't do much about that. You're kind of screwed if that's the case. But if you're at a private school, maybe it's not well that known, but maybe they've got some AP classes or IB classes or even some good advanced and honors classes. If you look at most of the advantages that the private school has, let's say it's the recommendations. With good coaching, you can learn how to pick the right people. You can learn how to guide them. Let's say it's demonstrated interest. You can learn how that works with good coaching. Even with curriculum, you can learn how to take the right courses to make yourself stand out. With essays, you can shine with getting assistance there. Coaching and guidance related to your extracurriculars. Most of those things, with good sound advice, you can actually learn the things that the private school is teaching everybody if you are getting that knowledge, which is what a lot of you do here. I can't tell you how many people say they listen to this podcast religiously. They've implemented it, and it's helped their kid tremendously in their college results just because you got the knowledge and you're able to apply it. So anyway, what are your thoughts?
I think it's tough out there, man. It's just too.
I know it is tough out there.
It's a lot.
I feel for kids because they have a limited number of schools that they've heard of that they think are good. And the numbers just do not work in their favor, the competition. That's why I'm always trying to convince people that there are a lot more great schools out there than just 50.
Right.
Which there really are. But as long as people think there's just 50 great schools and everybody applies to all that's 50, remember somebody said a long time, it's not hard to get into U.S. schools, but the only schools people want to go to are the ones that are hard to get in. So anyway, the public-private, it's a lot more nuanced than this. Depends on a lot of factors. Does your school have grade inflation? I hate to say this. There are certainly people that read files really well and they can detect grade inflation. There's no doubt about it. But for the most part, if I was a principal at a private school, I would not grade as hard as some of these schools grade, some of these teachers grade, because you are putting your kids at a disadvantage. From my experiences, some admission officers will say, oh, yeah, this B plus here would be an A plus somewhere else. But for the most part, that does not happen. You'll get dinged for that. Or, C plus, B plus, if we want to go with that. So if you're at a public school, don't feel like you're at a disadvantage compared to your private school peers, because most of the advantages, this is my takeaway, you can actually get them if you really know what you're doing, either through implementing all the stuff we talk about here or other quality sources or working one-on-one with a really good college coach. You can get all of these advantages, apply them to your situation, and in some cases, you can have the best of both worlds. I'll give you an example. A student I was working with at a really big public school. They had 658 kids in her graduating class. And she did really, really well in the college process. She got in a lot of places like the Georgetowns and the Wash U's and bunch of other private schools that I can mention, a lot of times with really, really great financial offers, even if the family didn't qualify for money. And in one case, I was talking to one of these highly selective schools about our application. And, a lot of times they won't talk to private college coaches, but in this case they did. They talked to me. And they said, want to know what was so impressive to me about her? She was at a really, really big public school, and the principal did her recommendation, and the principal knew her well. We don't see that a lot. So once again, if you kind of know how to get in there and stand out, you can, you can really shine. What are your takeaways, Anika? Besides, you want some more coffee and get back to your Star Wars.
All that you said.
So Anika is such a workaholic. We're here on a Saturday, and she's in her office at her college, in their office with her mask, working away. So whatever project you're doing, I'm going to let you get back to it.
I don't want to do this anymore.
This isn't the podcast, or this isn't.
This isn't working on a Saturday.
I hear you.
That's what I don't want. But I got some more coming.
I hear you. All right. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
Okay, friends. This was a long one. We've never done a 6-parter. We did one 5-part interview ever before. I'll say something. You might wonder, why are you always doing these multi-part interviews? There's really 2 reasons. One is, I'm just an in-depth kind of person. That's just the way I am. When I write a book, it's a 691-page book. When I have a podcast, it's a 90-minute podcast. If I can't interview somebody well in 15 or 20 minutes. There's too many questions I need to ask them. If I'm going to talk to someone, I'm going to do a deep dive. But it also serves another purpose. I can't, with a director of college counseling role I have, where I'm over 4 schools, and a growing practice as a college coach and a podcast, I could not possibly get 52 different people to interview 52 weeks of the year. It really would be impossible. But what I can do is I can get 12 to 18 a year, 12 to 20, and do 3 or 4 parters. So it sort of serves the dual purpose of it's sort of consistent with my sort of in-depth style, and it is manageable for me. So that's a little bit why we have longer interviews. Anyway, having said that, this is the final part of my interview with Julia, and then you get another Julia next week. Dave will tell you about that one later. A little younger Julia, but that's coming next week. I'll let Dave share that. In the final part, Julia explains what a counselor call is, why counselor calls occur, what occurs on a counselor call, what trends are happening with counselor calls, and we have a real frank, detailed conversation about counselor calls. And then I put Julia on the hot seat and ask her 6 lighthearted questions. Listen and enjoy the final part with my friend Julia Esquivel. So one thing we haven't talked about is counselor calls. Talk to us about counselor calls, what they are, why schools do them, what happens on the call. It's kind of a mysterious world that the most people don't know anything about. And so what can you share about counselor calls, Julia?
Yes. And what I'm about to say probably won't hold true whatsoever, maybe even 5 years from now. But counselor calls are essentially when I will call every college that any of my students have an active application at. So it could be a likely range school. I will still call and check in about my student's application. So the counselor calls can vary depending on the policies of the college. Quite a few colleges each year decide to ban the use of counselor calls. So, for example, Swarthmore did that this year. Cornell's been doing it for a few years. And then in some cases, all I can do is pick up the phone. I get stats from an admission officer about this is what the pool looked like and no other information. And some other schools, I'm able to have maybe a more nuanced conversation about our slate of applicants. A big myth is that I call up the school and say, hey, I have 5 students. I want you to take these 3 and don't take the other 2. That is a myth. And when parents don't believe us about that, I'm like, if that was true, don't you think I would be doing that?
Right.
You wouldn't be in my office upset that your child didn't get in. I don't like being yelled at. That I would have easily advocated for your child like that. And we try to back off the use of what's called advocacy calls because we support every application no matter what. And we're not putting in context or pitting one student against the other. But where it can be very helpful sometimes is if a student has some, extenuating circumstances, maybe something's going on in the family. So I'm able to provide that to the admission officer. At some schools that track demonstrated interest, it is sometimes helpful to talk about how seriously interested a student is. So particularly students who, if we weren't in the pandemic, I had a lot of students, either they're international, they don't have a license, or they're boarding students or low income. They're not going to get to college campuses, right? But they still might be very interested. So that is my way of being able to say actually, this student really likes y'all. You might see them on your campus. Particularly small liberal arts schools, they have so many limited spots. They want to take the students that might come, right? So it's my chance to also say, the student is very interested and whatnot, and also just have a little more sort of nuanced conversation about the overall pool. And it's helpful to me as a counselor when very rarely do I actually get a pure head scratch decision where I'm like, how did that college arrive at that decision? But if the admission officer is able to tell me, actually, we had a huge increase in students from Iowa this year. So your student from Iowa isn't all that exceptional. Or we don't need trombone players this year, Julia. So sometimes that's also helpful for me to counsel going forward. What are the more difficult majors? Every now and then I might get information if an essay landed really badly. Luckily, that has not happened to me on this side of the desk, but I was sure to let counselors know on the other side. So I will say, though, that we also at Milton have been thinking critically about our role in this because it tends to be the majority of counselor calls are coming from independent school counselors. What I love is that a lot of community-based organizations have wonderful relationships with colleges, and so they're able to have these conversations, which I think should happen. But more and more colleges, in the effort to be more equitable, are getting rid of counselor calls. So that way there's not an extra piece of information simply because I had the time and bandwidth to pick up the phone and the college was willing to listen to me about, somebody's application at length. So counselor calls are becoming more of a thing of the past. And at this point, I want to say probably only maybe 70% or less of our most popular schools are allowing for counselor calls, and very few of those are those sort of nuanced conversations about the student compared to the pool, and more of them are just about, here are our numbers this year, here's the rundown, we're going to send out decisions this day. So it's becoming less and less a thing as time goes on.
Yeah, I'm glad you explained why it's becoming less. There are more and more schools are saying, okay, who is it that has the counselor calls? Well, it's people that have professional college counselors like a Julia, been on both sides of the desk, that know their students extremely well. Those students are coming from more privileged environments, and are we being fair because we're not able to do that to the kid coming from the big public school where the counselor has 400 students on the caseload? And so are we creating an inherent advantage? And then more and more schools are starting to say, yeah, we are. And then I'm sure they also think of other things to do with their time too, if they don't do them. But I find a lot of times when schools do them, because they'll do them with me, as a CBO counselor, as well as when I was a boarding school college counselor, a lot of times I find they're trying to get a sense of yield.
Yes.
And that can be extremely helpful to them. Like, what are our chances of getting this kid, which can be, for certain schools, depending on what their yield ratio is, that can be extremely important for them and a big part of their decision-making process.
Yep.
In those instances, it's not necessarily courtesy to the school. It's also extremely helpful for them as they sort of try to figure out which of these really highly competitive students do you think will come. And of course, that's usually not the most selective schools, but a lot of the private schools that are like the strivers. That's my experience. Would you agree with that, or do you have a different experience?
No, absolutely. So especially for those schools that yield matters, these conversations are very helpful. And I actually find, and I think I felt this way on the other side of the desk, is that we try to be as honest as possible, because this is already an incredible opportunity that we get to have to talk to colleges one-on-one about each student. So I'm not, just because it would make me happy if the student is admitted, because it would make them happy, but I know they're not going to go. I'm not going to tell McAllister, oh, you'll see them in the fall, because you probably won't. And that way, that gives McAllister a little more room to maybe think about our student who is maybe a little bit down in terms of academics, but still a totally admissible applicant, or maybe a student from a different high school, right? So I find that too, the more honest you are with colleges, the better those conversations go. For sure, I would pick, when I was at Haverford, there are a bunch of counselors that I would listen to, but I know that they were, and it's fair, they were doing their job. They were doing their due diligence. They want the best for their kids. But I think also having an honest relationship allows for those conversations to go better. And I think the school is got to like your relationship with your high school better, when instead, if you're not sort of trying to just get the admit numbers up, but are really finding intentionally interested applicants and good fits.
I'm so glad you emphasized that. I just find that is extremely important, is that kind of transparency. And that's what actually, will more than likely, unless they come up with a policy not to do that, make them see value to the call and make them keep wanting to do that with your school. Because they're not doing counselor calls with 43,000 high schools out there.
Right.
They're doing this with sort of some of their traditional feeders that are sort of priority schools within their applicant pool. There's just not time for that. And so if you burn them with dishonesty, then, there's a great chance that's your last counselor call.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you want to keep them going for years to come, which is great. And I'm really glad you differentiated between an advocacy call and more of an information call. That's really important. It's important that people know that this is not our opportunity to try to persuade them that you need to take this kid, or you really, that's just sort of considered inappropriate.
Right.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, the recommended resource for episode 165 is a very unique one. In fact, I hesitated to include this, but if not now, then when? It's one that if it doesn't apply to you, just fast forward and skip it. But it's actually the PPP loan version 1. You're saying, what? So if you have your own business, whether that's a doctor's practice or college counseling business or whatever it is, you're eligible for a PPP loan. Now you might think, why do I want a loan? That's what I thought. My accountant has been on me since last March about this, saying, you need to apply for this, Mark. And I said, why do I want a loan? You have to repay a loan. It's actually not a loan. It's a forgivable grant. The loan is converted to free money as long as you use it, 60% of it for payroll. I said to myself, yeah, but I haven't honestly experienced hardship as a result of COVID, so I'm not going to qualify. Guess what? You do not have to have an income decrease. You can make your most money you've ever made this year. And guess what? There's no maximum income that makes you ineligible. You can make $1 million and you can still be eligible for this free money. Now, the maximum that you can claim is $100,000. So if you made $500,000, you could only limit yourself to $100,000. And you would receive, for that kind of income, approximately $18,000, $19,000 of free money. And I recommend you use bluevine.com. That's who NerdWallet recommends. That's who my accountant recommends. I've recommended this now to 7 people, and they've all gotten it. So the recommended resource for episode 165 is that you apply for the PPP loan, which is actually a forgivable loan. So it's a grant. And even if you didn't make much money at all, maybe you made $8,000 with your little side hustle, there's still free money there for you. And all of us could use a little money in our pocket. It's not quite college counseling related, but it kind of is because it can help you pay for college. But here is the urgency. You have to apply now. The deadline is March 31st. That's right, a week away. It takes about an hour to complete the application. How do I know it's legit? It's not just because my accountant told me. It's because I've already had my money deposited into my bank account. And I want the same thing to happen to you. And I want you to put it right into your child's college fund. Now return to my interview with Julia Esquivel. So, Julia, the time to wind down. I mean, you know how you and I, we can talk for hours as we often do. This has been great. This is actually a second longest interview that we've had. And I wanted it to go because almost every sentence that you shared, I know was incredibly valuable to our listeners. So I really, really want to thank you. But before I let you go, you know, we never let anybody get away without going on the hot seat.
Yeah.
So this is non-college admission stuff, just lighthearted stuff. So you ready?
Yes.
What is your favorite kind of music?
Ooh, Broadway musicals?
I'll let you put in whatever you want. You like musicals?
I
Good for
do.
you.
Yeah. That was me more just a little embarrassed to admit that, but I'm going to let the nation know.
Awesome. And what's your favorite TV show?
The Wire.
I've never seen it. What do you like about it?
Oh my gosh, you out of all people, Mark Stucker?
You know, there's so many TV shows that if you were to name, I've never seen them. Like, it's not that I never watch TV.
You're busy.
Well, I have it on in the background when I'm working, but I tend to have the same things on the time. It's usually sports or politics.
Well, you might like The Wire then, because even though it's an older show at this point, it is very apropos to almost everything in life. But essentially, it's also being from around the Mid-Atlantic. It's especially awesome because it takes place in Baltimore. But it's a very realistic portrayal, I've been told, of sort of how the drug business intersects with almost every piece of American society. And it is half real actors and half people, this is their real life. Harvard teaches a class on The Wire, a few other colleges, but the 4th season, which is the best one, actually looks at how the school system is a part of the drug trade. And it's really about basically race and policing in America as well. But I just can't say enough, but you got to stick with it because it takes a bit to get into it.
I forgot another huge thing. I have CNBC on all the time. I'm into investing, and so I usually have that going on in the background. But I'll have to branch out my interests a little bit. All right, here's another one for you. So if money was a non-issue, where would you go for a vacation?
Greece.
This is where Karis wants to go, my oldest daughter.
Oh, yeah?
Yes. So, my youngest daughter, Joy, graduating from UGA, she's got 3 classes left, and so her graduation present, I'm basically giving her a trip with her sister. And they can go anywhere, but their only limitation is they cannot spend more than $4,000. Like, that's it, which I feel like I'm being generous giving them that much, but that's what I committed to. So they're researching, and it looks like they're settling on Greece together. So they're going to go to Greece together. So,
love it.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so book every student and or parent should read.
Ooh.
Tough one, isn't it?
Yeah. I think right now I would say The Privileged Poor by Tony Jack.
Oh, that's a really good book.
Yeah. I think that might be a little more niche for the folks I work with, just because it's a private college and kids who went to private schools versus public schools. But I think it's very illuminating when it comes to what college is really about and what people think college might be about, and just sort of about race and income in the U.S.
You know, we have a recommended resource in every one of our episodes, and we've had that one on before. We've also had Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be by Frank Bruni, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And you know, a book that I think if you haven't read, I was thinking about all the stuff you're talking about, mental health and image. Have you read the book Enough as She Is?
No.
Oh, you have to read that book, Julia.
All right.
You read that book, and then let's have another conversation.
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
It just deals with all the pressures teenage girls face in ways they have to be feminine, they have to be sexy, they have to be smart, and they have all these pressures on them around female expectations, but then they also have the masculine expectations too, like gotta be successful in their career and make money, and it's just too much. It's just overwhelmingly too much, and it's creating all of these psychological problems in teenagers. And so that's just a book I tell every parent of a daughter to read and every teenage girl to read. I went crazy last Christmas and bought copies for all the both my daughters and my nieces and everybody. You've got to read this book. You've got to read this book.
Yeah,
it is amazing. So I want you to read that book, and then let's have one of our follow-up calls. That would be great.
That's great. Thank you.
All right. So last question. What's your advice for students and your advice for parents?
Ooh, in the college process or in general?
You know what? I'm going to just leave it at that. Whatever you want. You can make it the college process or you can make it life.
For students, I think this could go for both. Truly be your authentic self. I think that is the part that will give you the most success in the college process. And if being your authentic self doesn't feel as exciting to you as what you think you should be or what other people seem like to you, it's going to show up as inauthenticity at the end of the day. So it doesn't matter what you write down. If you're not into it, it's not going to be authentic. I am so much more excited talking to the student who literally all that they do is do Rubik's Cubes all day long and have these crazy world records. Yeah, maybe that doesn't translate into a career or an essay or anything like that. But I think it is so cool that somebody has an unabashed love for something. And I think that's so much more interesting than someone with 20 different activities on their list and whatnot if they're not super into them. So being your authentic self, however you show up as yourself. And for parents, I would say that perspective is probably the most important in two ways. One is towards your child, is that I think it's very easy for us to forget how we felt when we were younger. And it's not the same, right? Even though I'm young, I didn't go to college with, you couldn't apply online. I didn't have smartphones in college, things like that. The pressures that students face today are very different than even I faced when I was applying to college. So remembering how much judgment you felt, even though you know it was not real judgment when you got older, or just how difficult it is to be a high schooler, even if you think that your student is going through something very trivial, to affirm their feelings is so important for that child. So even if, yes, they are freaking out about nothing important, they're still freaking out, and you have to be there for that. And then you can help put things into perspective for them. And then I think every parent, I think where we get in trouble in the college process, and it actually comes from a good place, every parent wants what's best for their child, right?
Mm-hmm.
And every parent thinks their child has hung the moon, right? And maybe they did, but guess what? So did the child of your best friend, and so did the child of your sister and things. You know, every parent wants what's best, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your child is better than others or more exceptional than others. And the more you sort of feed that narrative, the less helpful it is for your child to deal with adversity. So if they're not looking at things, understanding where there are differences in life, or that you don't always get what you want, or that to react in very grandiose ways to, when you think about it, sort of small things, that's not setting a good example for your child, and it's not helping them figure out a solution to whatever problem they're going through. So being able to have perspective and being in their shoes, and also realizing their shoes are not the only ones in the world is very, I think, important for parents to know.
I could not think of better advice. That is fantastic. It's a great way for us to close, and I hope students and parents take that to heart. But before I let you go, I just thought about this. Are you familiar with Travel Zoo?
No.
You have to check out Travel Zoo. So it's this website, and you go on Travel Zoo, and then you click their top 20. And what they do is they scour all over the country, thousands of sources, and they come up with their 20 best travel deals. And so I was on there last night with my daughter, and they, like right now, for example, they have a 10-day trip to Greece. It includes airfare, includes accommodations for 10 nights, and then a bunch of other things too, like the sightseeing tours at all the different locations. There's some meals included and everything for $13.99. So it's just a place where, you can maybe ever get that Greece trip in, Julia.
I know. My mom went without me, by the way.
Bump you. I'm going.
To be fair, she was not going to wait around till I have only summers off. So she was like, I am not going to Greece in the summer.
Well, some of them have these incredible deals on there right now. Like there's this one, to Punta Cana, Dominican Republic, which is normally like over $400 a night just for that resort. And it's $399 for airfare and 4 nights there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, and the nice thing about it is you can use it anytime in all of 2021 or all of 2022. And if you have to cancel for any reason, full refund.
Great.
So that's just my little tip. I know we're off the script, but you started getting me thinking. Check out Travel Zoo, and for all of our listeners, check out Travel Zoo's top 20 things. But listen, this has been absolutely fantastic. I thank you so much for being so generous with your time, and just thank you for just your friendship over the last few years. And that we'll be in touch. I'll be in touch for at least my semi-annual check-in with Julia call.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mark. You're a reminder of why I love admissions so much and our relationship as well. So thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, my pleasure.
Next week in the news, Wanted, Students for Admission to College. A great article by Brennan Bernard of Forbes. Mark and Anika will discuss, what can you tell me about the value of affinity groups? Our question from a listener is, can you talk about when you have students that have unrealistic expectations of their college options? Our interview was with Julia Hutchinson, a high school senior from Wisconsin, and it's part 1 of 3 on a creative approach to learning what the students are like at the colleges on your list. And our college spotlight will be San Diego State.
And by the way, friends, if you had any doubt that I'm a talker or I do stuff in depth, instead of having a college spotlight this week, instead of making the article shorter, what did Dave and I do? We do a deep dive and just give you much more talk in our In the News. Just made it a 45-minute segment. So that's just who we are. Love us or hate us, we're talkers. We'll end here, and Dave and I'll talk some more.
All right. Good article, my friend.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe so you get every episode as soon as it is released. If you are interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. And you can write a review for us on your favorite podcast listening app. I am the producer of the Your College Bound Kid podcast. We have a fantastic team of 9 people. Shout out to our 3 co-hosts, Anika Madden, Dr. David Williams, and Dr. Lisa Ruff. Our sound engineer, who fixes all of our many errors, is Nemanja Montfitch. The amazing music you hear is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Our image editor is Talha Khan, and our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitri. If you want to have a college coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want to ask, or a college you want Lisa or me to do a spotlight on, or if you have a recommended resource or an article you think we should share, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you, our family, next week.